Welcome to another edition of TSA Safety Matters. I'm your host, Greg Kerr from Stakeholder Relations, and today we're with Mike Adams, TSA's Director for Boilers and Pressure Vessels and Operating Engineers, for a few thoughts of what's happening in the industry and TSA's efforts in promoting safety across the province. So thanks for being with us today, Mike.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to be here, Greg.
Excellent. Now you have a lot on your plate. I mean, they're pretty big sort of sectors to be responsible for, but you also have, I think, a lot of good news that you can share as well. So first off, what are the safety sort of rates or compliances that you're seeing right now specific to power engineers?
Well, for the operating engineering field, we're showing very improving trend on plant safety. Mm-hmm. Over the last few years, we've had a reduction in the number of plants that we call high-risk plants that are having trouble conforming with the regulation. The number of those plants have dropped by 18% over the last few years, whereas the number of low-risk plants that are improving their performance on meeting the regulatory requirements, they've gone up 12%, and now more than half of the plants in Ontario are deemed low-risk plants. Mm-hmm. And that's all due to the risk-informed decision-making process that we've implemented, where we focus our efforts on those plants that are having difficulty meeting the regulations. And we're being an advocate for them, and it's working.
Mm-hmm. So how long would typically an inspector spend with, let's say I'm going to a low-risk plant, and I want to speak to the chief there, or I want to speak to the people involved. How long would you think typically we would spend there, and what are the things that you would bring up?
The typical duration for a low-risk plant inspection is about an hour and a half. Mm-hmm. That's what our flat rate is based on, and that's enough time to meet with the chief, see how the plant's being operated, and determining that, yes, that plant is compliant with all the regulations. Mm-hmm. The higher-risk plants typically take longer.
Mm-hmm. But what would the sort of typical non-compliances be? Like when you go visit, I'm seeing this over and over again. What are they seeing?
One of the things that we see is on their maintenance routines, they have to make sure that the pressure relief valves are serviced every 5 years. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they let that slip, so that's one of our more frequent findings is the pressure valve hasn't been serviced in 5 years. Now that doesn't mean in 5 years and a day it's unsafe, but it means that they haven't met the requirements of the code of the regulation, and therefore we cite that as a high-risk non-conformance and give them 30 days, or actually because of that, 10 days to get that fixed. Mm-hmm. Or get it serviced, either replaced or serviced. Mm-hmm.
So almost like a best practice, so yes, everyone has to abide by this standard, right?
And it's prevention. We want to make sure those safety devices will work if needed. Mm-hmm.
To that point, we often upgrade regulations or with codes and standards, but we periodically review our regulations with industry and government, and we're committed to doing that right now. And how is that affecting you in both boilers and pressure vessels and operating engineers?
Well, both the operating engineer and BPVOE regulations are being reviewed right now at various stages. We're working with the ministry and the advisory council to start the process of modernizing both regulations. Both the regulations are about 15 years old. Mm-hmm. Where on the BPV side, we have a code adoption document which references all the technical standards. Those we update regularly. So the reference documentation for the codes and standards is current, but the actual regulation itself is stale, and we need to refresh that. On the operating engineering side, it is all inclusive, all the technical codes, so we have to restructure the operating engineer regulation so that all the legal components are in the regulation and all the technical components are in a code adoption document, which will allow us to more readily update them as technology evolves.
Yeah, because you'd want to have a kind of broad capture in the regulation, and as things sort of advance and develop, then your code adoption document is the one that fulfills that.
Exactly.
What are some of the big ones that you want to achieve for example, for power engineers?
One of the things we're working with on the operating engineering or power engineering field is standardization of the plant ratings. Like right now, a second-class plant in the Maritimes is different from a second-class plant in Ontario, which is different from a second-class plant in the West. So right now there's a program in place to standardize that across Canada, and once that's implemented, once that's decided upon, then it's up to all the regulators to adopt that new system for classifying the plants. So that's one of the things we're looking at for our regulation, is to incorporate those changes. And we're looking at other things like how new technology could reduce the manning requirements for plants. And one of the biggest things you want to do for the OE regulation is we want to officially change the name of the operating engineers to power engineers, just like all the rest of Canada.
Yes, or the rest of the world for that matter. But so given that we want to achieve this consensus across the country, does Ontario have more rigorous kind of rating systems, or is it just different? Like how does it differ?
It depends who you talk to.
Yeah.
We're maybe we're not the most rigorous, but we are close to the top. Every province is different. Ontario is heavy machinery, is manufacturing. Alberta is heavy oil. BC is heavy wood. Maritimes are heavy fish. That's the basic structure of their operating engineer clientele. Each one has different requirements, different peculiarities of how they address their unique issues.
So, and do you think it'd be easy to get that consistency, or
it's not easy at all?
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of heated dialogue, and but a lot of progress has been made, and it's envisioned that we will finalize the standardization recommendation this year.
So would you be working closely with the Institute for Power Engineers on a lot of this as well, or what are the bodies that you work with?
This study is done under the auspices of the Association of Chief Inspectors, which is part of the NAPSAC, which is the National Public Safety Advisory Committee with all the regulators across Canada. So we're doing it under the ACI, and so the IPE, the Institute of Power Engineers, is not involved directly. This is through the regulators who are generating, who are doing this study. Okay.
Well, I mean, you were recently at the IPE conference. You were a keynote speaker. What did you speak to power engineers about?
Basically, at that presentation, we did an overview of the difference between boiler BPV inspector and a power plant inspector. What's the difference between the two programs? Boilers and pressure vessels are all about the boilers. Operating engineers are all about the plants, which contain boilers. But the key thing that came up at that conference was the training of the new power engineers. There's the demographics is that we're going to be running out of power engineers in the very near future. So there's a large push on to address the future of operating engineers in Canada, and not just Ontario. So we've been working through the advisory council to look at ways we can increase the number of budding power engineers to get into the profession at an early age, so that when the baby boomers start retiring en masse, there will be people ready to take up the slack on all the power engineering jobs. So the advisory council just had a risk reduction group for that topic, and some recommendations were made for both industry, for ministry, for TSSA, for the IPE on things that we can do to improve the number of, or increase the number of operating engineers in being trained. one of the things that TSA was just successful at is we just commissioned our 7th college in Ontario that's now recognized to deliver power engineering training, and that's Conestoga in the Kitchener area. So that's 7 colleges now that are active in training or educating power engineers in Ontario. One of the roadblocks that we're running up against is practical time. That's for each of the years of training, we need 3 to 6 months of practical experience in an operating plant for each student before they can graduate and move on to the next level. Now we have a problem of balancing the availability, the two issues of the availability of the opportunities for practical experience and the quality of that plant. Like, we don't want to send a co-op student to a plant and all he does is sweep the floor. We want them to go to an operating plant that's operating and get practical experience. So we're trying to balance that plus against the fact that there's not enough of those positions available right now. So one of the things that I was doing at the IPE conference last September was strongly encouraging industry to open up their plants for opportunities to bring in co-op students so they can get the required practical experience. So that's been identified as one of the #1 roadblocks for continuing on the development of new operating engineers in Ontario.
Now, I imagine the response was quite positive in terms
Yes.
of accepting this, but I guess we can only influence so much in terms of getting more colleges out there and having the businesses where they can get the practical experience. Are there any discussions on what other alternatives we could possibly have to mitigate what will be probably a significant skills shortage if we don't get our ducks, if Ontario doesn't get its ducks in order, right?
Well, we'll be looking at contingency plans on if we can have a look at the manning requirements for various classification of plants. However, one thing we will not do is sacrifice the safety of the plants. So we will have to make sure that there are other alternatives. Some things that have been done in the past is we've downgraded plants. If they've got a cogen plant and a heating plant and they're having staffing issues, they can probably do without the cogen part and just rely on the grid for the electricity and just operate their heating plant at reduced manning. So these are things that we would be looking at, how to work with industry when there aren't enough operating engineers. Now, some of the places up north already have had problems like that, so we've worked with them to address their concerns. We've given them variances on temporary variances on staffing requirements, recognizing their existing expertise, but these are just temporary until they were able to rectify the problem. So we work proactively as an advocate with our clients to address these issues. Now we're trying to be proactive and mitigate the risk by getting more people trained up so that when the demographics hits, they will there will be people that we can bring on board.
And I guess convince young professionals to move up the scale, right, which is often a challenge as well.
Yes, especially going from third to second class. That's the hardest jump to do. And we have to look at how we can encourage and support those people in the field to advance their qualifications.
Now, one of the things that you also address on an ongoing basis is new technology, and you have some new things that pop up occasionally in boilers and pressure vessels, for example, in refrigeration. What are some of the things connected with that, and how is it affecting the rest of the industry?
One example is the use of copper tubing in refrigeration. This is a relatively new technology, and the current codes don't really address copper tubing. So one of the things that we're working on is upgrading the standards and the codes to address the unique aspects of copper tubing for refrigeration. So we're working on putting out a safety bulletin. There will be a safety blog similar to this about the safe use of copper tubing in Ontario for refrigeration. So that's one area.
And are there new things in piping or new things that you've discovered that are safety concerns at all?
Well, it's not so much a new thing. It's an ongoing issue with, say, piping installations. For anybody who has some piping work to do, they need to ensure that the piping is registered through TSSA so that they get a P number. They have to make sure that they use an authorized piping fabricator installer authorized by TSSA, and those installers need to follow their quality manual. And that's one thing that we're finding. Sometimes shortcuts are taken. For all repairs, inspections are supposed to be done both before and after the repair by either TSSA or an inspector. We find that's not always being done. People are calling after the repairs have been made. So we're going to be putting out a communication to industry to remind all the certified piping repair organizations that to ensure that either TSSA or the insurers are involved both before and after the repairs so that they are properly inspected.
Mm-hmm. Innovation is an integral part of the industry, as proven by the need for regulatory reviews and code updates. But it's also something that we do ourselves, and we've developed an innovation team to look at the upcoming Pan Am Games and how we're going to address that without impeding the sort of process or the business that follows through. How has that affected boilers and pressure vessels and operating engineers?
Well, one of the products of the innovation team is helps us in managing our huge database or install base of information. There's a fuzzy logic tool that the innovation team has developed that allows us to find all the information that we need. For instance, computers are fast, but they're stupid. Mm-hmm. They don't recognize the difference that Acme Inc. is the same company as Acme Incorporated, or if it's at 123 Main Street or 123 Main ST. It doesn't recognize those. What the fuzzy logic will do is it will recognize that all four of those entries all belong to the same company and will treat it accordingly, and that will help us get much better, much more accurate information on where all the plants are. Mm-hmm. For the Pan Am Games, that helped us a lot to identify what systems we have in our system that are involved with the Pan Am Games, and allowed us to put together a good program to make sure that all the operating plants are up to speed and safe to go for the Pan Am Games, and same with all the sites with boilers and pressure vessels. We've been able to determine that every single site with boilers and pressure vessels are insured, so they're being inspected by the insurers, but we're also doing a sort of a belt and suspenders and confirming that all the boilers and pressure vessels in those Pan Am sites are safe to operate.
Mm-hmm. And what have you found so far?
Well, we did get one surprise so far. We found that one site went and replaced all their refrigeration and boilers and didn't bother telling us. So we're now going to do the first inspection process to update our database with that information. And so that's was very enlightening, and that's going to be another communication program we're going to be implementing to remind all the owners and operators that every single boiler and pressure vessel needs an original certificate of inspection from TSSA in order to lawfully operate. Mm-hmm. So we're going to be communicating that and following through on that with visual inspections.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, what's unique, I think, about that fuzzy logic, which almost sounds like an oxymoron, how intelligent it actually is. It builds on accumulative knowledge. Mm-hmm. So if A, then B, C, and so on and so on.
It learns.
So that'll be a great benefit, I think, going forward.
Definitely.
For BPVOE.
Definitely. Other innovative functions that we've done, we're now looking at automating things. Like before, all the companies that we certify for boilers for manufacturing and repair, we used to manually identify, look up an Excel spreadsheet, find out who's coming due, manually put together the package, mail it out. We've now automated that through the Innovations Committee, so that now the system checks the expiry dates of all the certificate of authorization holders, and 8 months before they come due, the system will automatically send an email to that company with all the links, all the information, and bang, they have all the information at their hands in order to start the renewal process. So that was a huge impact on the manual labor for our folks at head office.
Mm-hmm. Have you already started to roll it out?
It was implemented about 3 or 4 months ago.
Excellent. Now, is 6 months too long a period to remind people, or is that appropriate for?
No, it's needed because there's a lot of paperwork we have to schedule. We have to schedule the surveys for the manufacturers. They have to schedule a manufactured item to use as a demonstration for their processes. So no, it's 6 to 8 months is has been determined as the optimal time to give them enough time to prepare for the audit.
Excellent. Now, there's also the possibility of building some interesting apps for BPV.
Yes, we are looking at using the potential in our new iPhones to figure out how we can assist our inspectors through development of an app for, say, the first inspection process or for the welders tests, how we can do that on the app rather than the pen and paper that we're currently using. So these are something that's coming up this summer. We're going to be looking at seeing if we can develop those, because that'll be pretty exciting to be able to just pull out your phone and click on an app and say all these checklists have been met. Push the pass button, and the phone will automatically connect to our system and issue the certificate of inspection automatically. So again, will make the inspector's job much easier in the performance of the safety inspections.
Faster, right?
Yep.
So more cost efficient. And wouldn't it be wonderful? You just take a snapshot of a rating plate, boom, there's all your information that you need at your fingertips.
So these are all things that we're looking at through the innovation aspect at TSSA.
Excellent. Now, we also recently announced a fee freeze for customers, and doing this because we are being cost effective in our operations. How is this going to affect boilers and pressure vessels and operating engineers?
Well, for BPV, the funny thing about that notice is that TSSA is having a fee freeze for everything except for boilers and pressure vessels. Now, the reason for that is the last fee increase was a one-time increase over 3 years of roughly 10%. For BPV, it was decided to phase that in every 3% every 3 years.
Yeah, lower percentage.
So this coming May is the last 3% increase, but after that, the BPV will be frozen just like the rest of the programs, in sync with the rest of the programs, until I think it's April 2017.
Well, that's good news.
Well, yeah, it's like I say, there's only that one more 3% increase for BPV, and for OE it was with the other programs. It had a 10% increase in 2013.
Perfect. Well, a lot of things on the go, and a lot of exciting initiatives. Do you have any parting address that you'd like to give as director?
Well, I would just like to remind folks out there that we have several new conduits where you can contact us if you have any issues or questions. We've got 2 hotlines that are available now, that are manned during office hours. I think they'll be shown on in the blog. We've got an email address at bpvcustomerservice@tssa.org if you have questions. We have the ombudsman who can assist if you're not getting if you have issues with any of the or any problems with TSSA, to contact the ombudsman. The details are on the website. We also have on the safety blog, it's called Ask TSSA, where you can just type in a question and it'll automatically go to the appropriate
Technical advisor.
safety program, and we will answer the questions and publicly post the answers. So,
And sometimes produce a video specifically for that.
depending on what the question is, yes. So we've got a lot of avenues for contacting us. This video blog is another way of us being letting all our clients know what's going on with the BPVOE program.
You got LinkedIn. Well, LinkedIn for the Institute for Power Engineers.
Yes, we are active on the LinkedIn Institute of Power Engineers group. I monitor that regularly and actually make a comment once in a while. But that's another area for posing questions or getting answers. So we are getting more and more active in the social media. So we encourage everyone to contact us if you have any concerns, issues, or suggestions.
Excellent. Well, thanks for being here today, Mike. It's been a pleasure.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Stay tuned for more TSA Safety Matters.